The younger sister of former First Lady Jackie Kennedy Onassis has died. They were married for 15 years before they divorced in 1974. Her daughter says she died of natural causes in her home in Manhattan yesterday. She was 85 years old.
At 85, Lee Radziwill made her final exit with the same sharp elegance she used to decorate a room. For decades, she was the other Bouvier sister, the one living in Jackie Kennedy's long shadow while chasing her own titles and high society dreams. But when her will was finally read in 2019, she left the world with one last surprise. Instead of a long list of heirs, Lee narrowed her entire fortune down to just one person, the daughter-in-law. When the details of Lee Radziwill's final will and testament began to leak from the surrogate's court in 2019, the public didn't just look for a dollar sign, they looked for a name. For some, it wasn't about who got the money, but who didn't. Oops! Specifically, they were looking for Carol Radziwill. To the millions of viewers who watched The Real Housewives of New York City, Carol was the cool girl of the franchise, a Peabody Award-winning journalist who happened to be a princess by marriage. But to the woman at the center of the estate, Carol was something much more complicated. She was the widow of Lee's only son, Anthony. Where's Anthony? Then, the relationship between Lee and Carol was, for a long time, the stuff of high society legend. They were bound by a shared, unspeakable tragedy. In the summer of 1999, the Radziwill-Kennedy dynasty was hollowed out in a matter of weeks. First, Lee's nephew, John F. Kennedy Jr., died in a plane crash. Less than a month later, Lee's son Anthony succumbed to a long battle with cancer. In the wake of that double-fisted blow, Lee and Carol were often seen as a united front of grief. They were two women who had lost the man who anchored them to the future. Carol often spoke of Lee with a mix of reverence and intimate knowledge, describing a mother-in-law who was as demanding as she was enchanting. Because of this bond, the world expected a gesture. In the circles Lee moved in, the Avenue Montaigne apartments, the Southampton estates, the front rows of Armani shows, a will is more than a financial ledger. It is a final, public grade on a relationship. When the document revealed that Lee had made no provision for Carol, the silence was deafening. There were no heirloom jewels, no summer houses, and no token of affection for the woman who had carried Anthony's name for 2 decades. To the average observer, this felt like a cold, calculated snub. It suggested a falling out, a hidden rift, or perhaps a disapproval of Carol's foray into the world of reality television, a medium that was the antithesis of Lee's quiet, old-world Sphinx persona. However, to understand why Lee left Carol with nothing, one has to understand the icy logic of the Bouvier-Radziwill bloodline. For Lee, wealth wasn't just money. It was a dynastic baton that only moved in one direction, straight down the family tree. Lee Radziwill grew up in a world where the concept of family was a fortress. You were either inside the walls by birth, or you were a guest. While Carol was a beloved guest for many years, she was not a Radziwill by blood. In the rigid, aristocratic mindset that Lee maintained until her final breath, assets were to be protected and concentrated, not diluted among in-laws. There is a specific kind of high society pragmatism at play here. Lee likely viewed Carol as a self-sufficient, successful woman, a best-selling author, and a television star who had built her own life and her own bank account. In Lee's eyes, the fortune was a sacred trust meant for the continuation of the lineage, not a gift for those who had already found their own way. There is also the historical precedent of the Jackie factor. Lee had spent her entire life watching how the Kennedy and Auchincloss families handled their millions. She saw Jackie, her own sister, famously exclude her from her will because she had already provided for her during her life. This cycle of financial discipline, or perhaps financial withholding, was the only language Lee knew. By leaving Carol out, Lee wasn't necessarily saying she didn't love her. She was saying that the story of the Radziwill money had reached a natural conclusion with her son's passing. But if you're Lee, would you automatically give your fortune to the spouse of your eldest? The exclusion of the daughter-in-law served as a strong reminder that in the world of the true elite, sentimental value rarely trumps the preservation of the estate. Carol was left with her memories and her own career, while the keys to the kingdom were handed over with surgical precision. Lee didn't leave a trail of breadcrumbs for her extended circle. She left a single massive loaf for the only person she felt truly belonged at the table. And if the daughter-in-law was the one left in the cold, it only made the spotlight on the woman who inherited it all shine that much brighter. And this person makes perfect sense as the single inheritor. The lone heir. With Carol Radziwill essentially erased from the financial ledger, ouch. The spotlight shifted entirely to one woman, Anna Christina Tina Radziwill. If Lee's life was a grand, noisy opera played out on the world stage, Tina was the quiet, steady hum in the background. She was the daughter who stayed. In a family tree defined by its towering, often exhausting icons, a first lady for an aunt, a prince for a father, and a fashion legend for a mother, Tina managed the impossible. She remained a mystery. When the news broke that Tina was the sole beneficiary of Lee's estate, it wasn't just about the money. It was about a mother's final, fierce endorsement of her only surviving child. To understand why Tina deserved the fortune, you have to look at the emotional tax of being Lee Radzivill's daughter. Lee was a woman of difficult beauty and high standards, a mother who lived in a state of perpetual aesthetic perfection. Growing up as her daughter meant navigating a world where a misplaced vase or a poorly chosen dress was a minor tragedy. Tina didn't just inherit Lee's bank account. She inherited the decades of emotional labor required to be the confidant of a woman who was famously hard to please. In the 90s, when Lee's son Anthony was battling the illness that would eventually take his life, it was Tina who became the family's emotional anchor. While the world watched the tragic, public decline of the Radziwill Kennedy cousins, Tina was the one in the hospital rooms and the quiet hallways of their Manhattan apartments. She was the person who didn't write a memoir, didn't go on a talk show, and didn't seek the camera's glow. In the eyes of Lee, a woman who guarded her privacy like a crown jewel, this loyalty was the ultimate currency. By leaving everything to Tina, Lee wasn't just settling a debt, she was rewarding a lifetime of discretion. The legal mechanism Lee used to ensure Tina got everything was a power of appointment. This is a sophisticated tool used by the ultra-wealthy to direct assets from existing family trusts into new ones. It allowed Lee to bypass the usual squabbles and funnel her wealth directly to Tina. This wasn't a sudden whim on her deathbed. It was a choreographed move designed to keep the Radziwill legacy concentrated in the hands of the one person who had never betrayed it. There is also the simple, heartbreaking reality of loss. After Anthony died in 1999, Tina was all Lee had left. The two women shared a bond forged in the fires of back-to-back funerals. For the last 20 years of Lee's life, Tina was her constant companion, her travel partner, and her protector against a world that still viewed Lee as a 60s relic. Lee saw in Tina a mirror of her own resilience, but without the desperate need for public validation that had characterized her own youth. By the time the will was read, it became clear that Tina wasn't just an heir, she was a steward. She was the person Lee trusted to handle the priceless Warhol portraits, the Giacometti sketches, and the scrapbooks filled with letters from the most famous men of the 20th century. In the world of the Bouvier, money was always a tool for control, but in this final act, Lee used it as a tool for peace. She ensured that Tina would never have to step into the spotlight unless she chose to, providing her with a fortress of financial security that the spare sister herself had spent a lifetime building. Tina's inheritance was the ultimate thank you for a lifetime of quiet service. It signaled that in the end, the most valuable thing Lee owned wasn't a title or a diamond, it was the unwavering presence of a daughter who never asked for the spotlight, and in doing so, became the only one left to stand in it. To understand the true scale of what Tina inherited, we have to look past the family drama and into the actual vault of the woman who was once a princess. How rich was Lee? Exactly. The architect of elegance. One has to look past the cold digits on a bank statement and into the very fabric of the 20th century to understand the fortune Lee Radziwill left behind. For years, the whisper among the New York and Paris elite was that Lee was land rich but cash poor. A woman who lived like a queen on a budget that was constantly being stretched to its breaking point. Yet, when the executors finally tallied the accounts in 2019, the spare sister had quietly amassed an estate valued at roughly $50 million. This wasn't just a pile of money, it was a curated collection of a life lived at the absolute summit of global society. Lee's wealth was a complex tapestry woven from three distinct threads: inherited dynasty, savvy self-branding, and the strategic preservation of family assets. It began with the Bouvier bloodline. Her father, Blackjack Bouvier, may have burned through a significant portion of his wealth on Wall Street and at the racetrack, but the family foundations remained deep. More importantly, her mother Janet's remarriage to Standard Oil heir Hugh D. Auchincloss placed Lee and Jackie in the orbit of old money that didn't just spend, it endured. Growing up at Marywood and Hammersmith Farm, Lee learned early on that money was a tool for creating an environment. But Lee was never content to simply be a trust fund socialite. Throughout the 70s and 80s, she pioneered the idea of the socialite as a professional. Long before modern influencers existed, Lee was monetizing her taste. She founded an interior design firm that catered to the kind of people who owned multiple palaces but didn't know where to put a Louis XV chair. Her style wasn't just about luxury, it was about intellectual chic, a mix of exotic Turkish textiles, English manor house comfort, and French precision. She famously decorated for clients who, she once joked, would not be there more than 3 days a year. These were not cheap commissions. They were high-stakes transactions of cultural capital. Her wealth was further bolstered by her decade-long tenure as a PR executive and brand ambassador for Giorgio Armani. In this role, Lee wasn't just a face. She was a bridge between European couture and American high society. She helped turn Armani into a household name for the ladies who lunch. And in return, she was compensated with a salary and a wardrobe that would make a museum curator weep. Then, there were the houses. Lee's real estate portfolio was a roadmap of her life's journey. There was the legendary London townhouse on Buckingham Place, the Turville Grange Manor in Buckinghamshire, and the chic apartment on Avenue Montaigne in Paris. By the time of her death, her primary asset was her sprawling Upper East Side co-op on East 72nd Street. Occupying an entire floor and accessible only by a private elevator, the apartment sold shortly after her death for nearly $6 million. But the true hidden value lay inside those walls. The 2019 Christie's auction, titled "The Collection of Lee Radziwill," was the moment the public finally saw the depth of her treasury. It wasn't just furniture, it was history. There were sketches by Giacometti, photographs by Cecil Beaton and Peter Beard, and personal gifts from world leaders. A single charm bracelet she had given to Jackie sold for tens of thousands of dollars. The auction alone brought in millions, proving that even Lee's stuff was more valuable than most people's entire portfolios. She had mastered the art of the living estate, surrounding herself with items that appreciated in value simply because she had touched them. Lee Radziwill's fortune was the ultimate revenge on those who thought she was merely a shadow. She had literally much for the people at the back. She didn't have the Kennedy political machine or the Onassis shipping billions, but she had something perhaps more durable, a name that was synonymous with the highest level of taste. She managed to die a multimillionaire in her own right, proving that while Jackie may have been the first lady, Lee was the undisputed queen of her own. Very lucrative domain. As the dust settled on her millions, one final ghost remained in the room, the lingering shadow of her sister's will and the mystery of the already provided for fortune. The hidden fortune and the Jackie confusion. If there is one thing that haunts the memory of Lee Radziwill more than the glamorous photos or the high society rumors, it is a single, stinging sentence from another woman's will. In 1994, when Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis died, the world waited to see what she would leave the sister who had been by her side through the fires of the Kennedy administration and the Greek tragedies of the Onassis years. The answer was a cold, printed vacuum. Jackie's will famously stated, "I have made no provision in this, my will for my sister, Lee B. Radziwill, for whom I have great affection, because I have already done so during my lifetime." For decades, that line was the ultimate Bouvier burn. It painted a picture of Lee as a perpetual charity case, a woman living off the scraps of her more successful sister. This created a long-standing myth of the impecunious princess, the idea that Lee died with nothing but her name and a few nice chairs. But when Lee's own estate was tallied in 2019, it revealed a hidden fortune that proved the sisters' financial dynamic was far more complex than a simple handout. The $50 million figure that emerged after Lee's death was a shock because it suggested that Lee hadn't just been provided for by Jackie, she had been quietly building her own fortress. The confusion stems from what Jackie actually meant by those famous words. Biographers have since suggested that Jackie didn't just hand Lee envelopes of cash. Instead, Jackie had allegedly stepped in years earlier to set up massive trust funds for Lee's children, Anthony and Tina, and had helped Lee navigate her own financial tight spots when the Radziwill marriage ended in a trail of debt. By Jackie's logic, she had already bought Lee's peace of mind by securing the children's future. Yet, Lee's final treasury was built on more than just Kennedy kindness. It was built on the remains of a world that no longer exists. The 2019 Christie's auction, the collection of Lee Bouvier Radziwill, was less of a yard sale and more of a financial exorcism. Every item, from the $50,000 photo albums of her trip to India with Jackie to the watercolor floral studies she painted herself, blew past their estimates. The auction proved that Lee's greatest asset wasn't her bank balance. It was her brand. She had a Midas touch for objects, A simple button-tufted chair became a 5-figure investment just because Lee Radziwill had sat in it. The real secret of the hidden fortune was that Lee had mastered the art of living wealthy while keeping her capital locked behind a series of complex trusts. Her estate plan was a masterclass in privacy, using irrevocable trust to ensure that while the public might see the headlines, they would never see the full ledger. By funneling everything to Tina, Lee wasn't just being a mother, she was making sure the Bouvier Radziwill money finally stayed in one place, away from the prying eyes of the press and the shadow of the Kennedy name. Radziwill's will was her final reply to Jackie's. If Jackie's document suggested that Lee was a dependent, Lee's document proved she was an owner. She died on her own terms, in her own home, with her own millions. She didn't leave a legacy of needs. She left a legacy of curated, concentrated power. For 85 years, she was the sister who came second, but in the quiet silence of the surrogate's court, she made sure she got the last word. Now you know, the person standing at the center of the vault was Anna Christina Tina Radziwill. Tina chose the luxury of silence. She was the daughter who stayed, the one who navigated Lee's exacting standards and the family's darkest tragedies without ever seeking a headline. By leaving Tina everything, Lee wasn't just passing on cash, she was securing the only person who had given her total, quiet loyalty. Tina deserved the fortune because she was the only heir who treated the Radziwill legacy as a private treasure rather than a public stage. Lee's final word to the world. But the deeper meaning of Lee's decision goes far beyond money. For most of her life, Lee Radziwill existed in comparison. She was the other Bouvier sister. The stylish one, yes. The European princess, yes. The woman who moved between Truman Capote dinners and royal galas with effortless elegance. But always, in the public imagination, she stood slightly behind Jackie, the first lady, the global icon, the myth. That shadow shaped everything. When Jackie's will omitted her, it wasn't just a financial statement. It became a cultural headline. It reinforced decades of tabloid narratives suggesting rivalry, jealousy, imbalance. Lee never publicly lashed out. She didn't write a tell-all. She didn't dismantle her sister's memory. Instead, she did something much more strategic. She built quietly. Over time, Lee transformed herself into a tastemaker whose eye became currency. Designers sought her approval. Fashion houses courted her. Her homes in London, Paris, and New York weren't just residences. They were curated environments that increased the value of everything inside them. She understood something fundamental about elite society. Perception compounds. If you maintain mystique, the market follows. By the time Christie's opened the bidding in 2019, the world wasn't just buying furniture, it was buying proximity to a vanished era. The golden glow of post-war aristocracy, the whisper of Studio 54, the final embers of Camelot. And that nostalgia translated directly into dollars. Yet, perhaps the most telling part of Lee's estate plan wasn't the number attached to it. It was the structure. By channeling her wealth through trust and placing Tina at the center, Lee ensured continuity rather than spectacle. There would be no messy public probate drama, no distant relatives fighting in court, no opportunistic memoir deals attached to inheritance disputes. It was tidy, controlled, intentional. That control may have been the truest reflection of who Lee really was. For someone who spent decades being analyzed, compared, and occasionally dismissed, her final act was deeply personal. She defined her own value. She confirmed that whatever assistance Jackie may have provided during difficult years, Lee ultimately stood on her own financial ground. Her fortune wasn't a leftover, it was a culmination. And in choosing Tina, she wasn't just rewarding loyalty, she was protecting the narrative. Tina had watched the myth swirl around her mother for years. She had seen how easily society reduced Lee to a supporting character. By entrusting everything to her daughter, Lee made sure that her story, the real one, would remain safeguarded by someone who understood both its glamour and its pain. In death, Lee Radziwill achieved something she rarely received in life: autonomy without comparison. No sister beside her, no society column framing the headline, just a carefully structured legacy and a single heir. For 85 years, she moved through rooms where history was being written. In the end, she wrote her own final chapter, and she made sure it belonged entirely to her. Did you see it coming too? We'd love to hear your thoughts about Lee's financial decision. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the lives of the world's most fascinating icons. Subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Thanks for watching.